Hi everyone, welcome to the August 2nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and Craig, it's a pretty busy time of year with Saratoga and Del Mar both running. A lot of stakes taking place, not just on the weekends, basically every day of the Saratoga meet. I know similar with Del Mar, they've got good horses running almost every day of their meet through this month of late July and into August. So a lot of stakes to talk about. We've also got some impressive two-year-old performances that we're going to discuss. Just a lot of content to get through on this show.
Yeah, several. We even have some races from a couple other venues as well. And what I like about this time of year is a lot of these horses we're going to talk about, we're going to see run back at the very same meets at Saratoga and Del Mar and some similar or even bigger races than what we saw this week. So lots of fun stuff to look forward to.
Yeah, that's hopefully true with the two horses that we saw as stars on Saturday at Saratoga, which we'll begin with when they ran the Grade 1 Alfred G. Vanderbilt and Grade 2 Jim Dandy on that Saturday card. Let's start with the older horse, the sprinter Jackie's Warrior, winning the Vanderbilt, Craig. I mean, what can you say about this horse? You rarely see Grade 1 victories come as easily as this guy achieved it on Saturday. Obviously not beating the strongest field, but does that really matter when you win the way this horse does?
No, I mean, I don't think this horse was ever asked at any point in the race. And somebody asked about the speed figure on Twitter when I posted it. He got a 123 and it said it didn't match the visual. But I just don't think it even matters in this case because I know neither one of us are big on the could have run faster, but clearly Jackie's Warrior could have run faster.
Yeah, this is one of those where I was at Saratoga on Saturday to see this one and kind of gives you goosebumps to see it live. That horse turning into the stretch, and you could see Joelle just never asking him for any run, as you said. I mean, just basically sitting there in the stirrups like a statue. I mean, that's used as a cliche, but it actually was the case in this race. And he just coasted into the wire. The margin of victory was diminishing at the end, but I mean, clearly this horse was geared down from a long way out. And he can obviously run faster than this. He'll probably need to face some tougher rivals in the future. But I mean, to earn a 123 TimeformUS speed figure, never asked for your best, while giving the runner-up 10 pounds. I mean, that should not go unnoticed. This was a handicap, and they did assign Jackie's Warrior 127 for this race, and the runner-up was carrying 117. Just very impressive. There's really a few more accolades you can pile on this horse, and it's just going to be interesting to see what happens with him through the rest of the year. They're going to try the Forgo next on, I believe, Travers Day, and then it'll be on to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and it feels appropriate that this horse should earn a Breeders' Cup Sprint victory because he's kind of established himself as one of the greatest sprinters that we've seen over the past few decades, and he really needs to earn that Breeders' Cup Sprint win to go along with all of his other impressive victories.
Yeah, that is the one thing missing from his resume, and I think it would be, at this point, pretty disappointing if he weren't able to win it. It wouldn't take away from his accomplishment so far, but it's definitely one that I'm sure his connections really won after, to be blunt, he flopped last year. He just didn't run his race. Didn't seem to show up that day. So looking forward to seeing where he shows up next, as always. And I do want to give a props to the runner-up, Knee Deep in Snow. While he was never any threat to Jackie's Warrior, I thought it was really impressive where he's a horse who I think I picked him when he ran on the forecast last time and ran an okay third that day at 6-1, but he jumped way up in company to this Grade 1. And he's a horse who's done his best running on the front end. And in this case, it seems like the trainer read the PPs just like we did, knew he couldn't battle with Jackie's Warrior, and actually dropped back to dead last and made a really nice run to get second at a big price. And ran a similar speed figure as well, 121 here. He had run 120s recently, so good effort by him.
Yeah, I was actually doing a guest spot on the Capital OTB show on Saturday morning, and the guest who was on right before me was Marshall Graham, and I was kind of overhearing his interview and what he was saying. They asked about this horse and kind of said, we know we're probably not going to beat Jackie's Warrior, so we want to ride to get a piece of it, and that's basically what they did. They took this horse off the pace, didn't try to tangle with Jackie's Warrior early, and the plan worked to perfection, getting up to finish second at 22-1. So nice to get a Grade 1 placing with a horse that they claimed for just $80,000, Knee Deep in Snow, the runner-up in the Vanderbilt. Let's move on to the other stakes from that Saturday at Saratoga. That was the Jim Dandy, the local prep for the Travers. This one, a grade 2 event, and it was a big day for Steve Asmussen as he got his big older sprinter to deliver Jackie's Warrior in the Vanderbilt and his major 3-year-old Epicenter, taking down this Jim Dandy, and Craig probably establishing himself as the favorite for the Travers.
Yeah, he looked really good doing it. It was impressive how he did it as well. He had a little trouble early. He dropped to the back of the pack, something that I don't think many of us were expecting. And it didn't matter. He was much the best in this race. I did want to talk about the speed figure a little bit for this one because there were 2 9-furlong races on the day. And it's one I'm just not sure about, so I just want to be clear with people with that. The early 9-furlong race looked a lot quicker than this one. For now, I have them rated together. I just don't know if I'm comfortable with that. So this race, when I look back at race 3 on the card, I just have a sneaky suspicion I may have that one too high. And rating these horses together might not have been rating those 2 races together may not have been the best move. So it's possible this one may even be a little bit faster. It's just something I'm going to have to take a deeper look at on these slower Monday and Tuesday days that we get in horse racing.
Yeah, we're not going to discuss that starter allowance 3rd race in depth, but I will say it was one where it felt like the winner improved a lot. It was first off the claim for Saffie Joseph, just a weird horse that had never run that well in the past, but there were some stories that he was working well, and he put forth a huge effort to win that race. But as for the Jim Dandy, that other 9-furlong race that Craig was talking about, not the kind of trip you were expecting Epicenter to work out, and he definitely broke like a half step slowly, and I get why Joel took him in hand almost immediately with a horse that, they've taught to rate, and, it's just a 4-horse field. You didn't want to risk getting shut off heading into that clubhouse turn, so he kind of made sure that he kept him out of trouble for the entire trip, and clearly rode him with a ton of confidence, not really worrying about the fact that he placed him at the back of the pack, having to pass everybody. He just came into the stretch, and I don't think Joel ever even took the whip out or showed it to the horse. I mean, he just did it under a hand ride, had his ears pricked across the wire. I mean, A+ for the visual for this race. And we'll see if he can work out a similar trip or if it even matters in the Travers, given the form that he's in right now. But it is kind of interesting the way that his running style has gone through this evolution since the spring.
Yeah, my one concern would be that he definitely did break a little slow, and that's something we've seen from him recently, which probably isn't that surprising given that they've taught him the rate. He was a horse that got beat in Louisiana trying to go wire to wire. But I would have small concern that could be more of a problem if you're facing more than 3 other horses. It wasn't a big deal in this field where he was able to just tuck in behind, didn't have to worry about traffic, but that may not be the case as he moves on this season.
We should talk about the 2 Chad Brown runners in this race. It's possible that both could proceed on to the Travers. I think we're waiting to hear about early voting. I thought Zandon ran fine, Craig. Stalking a horse in second, not really his ideal trip. He was the one that was taken a little bit out of his preferred running style, with Epicenter not using the tactical speed that we thought he might show. He ran okay to be second. The big disappointment was the Preakness winner, early voting, who got a perfect trip and just had absolutely no answer.
Yeah, the pace wasn't much in this one. It was on the slow side, not quite enough to give it to Blue Fractions in TimeformUS, but it was a moderate pace. He was clear. He had no real excuse. I don't want to give Zandon too much of an excuse because of that. I mean, he was close to a fairly tepid pace. It's not like he's always come from far back. In a small field, it's going to be hard to do. So he ran fine. He got a 121 speed figure in here. I just think Epicenter is clearly the better horse.
Yeah, it's setting up a pretty intriguing Travers, and while we're talking about Travers contenders or horses that will run in the Travers, we should just quickly dial it back to Friday at Saratoga and mention the prep for this race, the Curlin. Not a graded prep. This is just a restricted race for horses that have never won a stakes, I believe, around going a round of ground. Artorias for Chad Brown, stepping off just a maiden win. This well-bred son of Arrogate had no trouble handling the stretch out to 1 1/8 miles around 2 turns, and he was a pretty visually impressive winner of this race, but he's probably going to have to get faster if they try the Travers next.
Yeah, he will definitely need to get faster. He ran a 115 speed figure, but something he's done is gotten faster in all three starts. He's pretty lightly raced at this point, and the one positive I would say outside of the lower speed figure, if you want to consider that a negative, is that it sure looked like another furlong isn't going to be any issue for him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He is by that damn Paula Silver Lining, who was a grade one winning sprinter a number of years ago. She was actually, I think, one of the top sprinters in the country one season. But Artorias apparently taking a little bit more after the sire side with Arrogate on the top, and definitely seemed like the 9 furlongs was right up his alley in this race. I would say that there were some no-shows in behind him, Craig. It just seems like Creative Minister, who was third, is a horse that hasn't really gone on since he was third in the Preakness. I know that Preakness speed figure was a number that we had questioned a little bit at the time, with a lot of horses running career best numbers in there. Epicenter's come back to run back to it, but really nobody else has run quite as well as they did that day. So one that I'm keeping an eye on, but he didn't go on. The horse that I liked Be Better, I mean, something must have happened with him. He looked like he was out of the race very early, so I don't know if he bled or there was some other issue, but clearly something was awry with that runner. So that made it a slightly easier assignment for Artorias, but clearly he's one that's moving in the right direction. Let's go back to the beginning of the week at Saratoga, and I'll just go through these stakes in chronological order from Wednesday through Sunday. The Wednesday feature was the Grade 2 Honorable Miss. Just a 4-horse field in this one, but we did see a big speed figure, I think the first big speed figure from Kamari, a horse that has always had a lot of talent, Craig. Been tried in a number of continents, different surfaces, but she typically does run well in the dirt when she doesn't have an excuse or get the wrong trip, which I think might have been the case in her first couple of dirt starts this year. But clearly things worked out for her in this honorable miss on Wednesday.
That was definitely a big race from her. She wound up with a 122 speed figure, which may be her career best if memory serves. She had run a pace adjusted 121 a couple starts back when she dueled on the lead in that 7 furlong race at Churchill, I believe it was. But yeah, it was a big effort from her, and it was also a big effort from the runner up, Frank's Rocket, who just broke poorly from the rail and really dug in. This is a horse I almost always try to beat. She always seems to get over bet. Um, Not so much lately because she hasn't been racking up the wins like she did early in her career. But in this spot, I got to tip my hat to her because she ran huge. She actually got a little better speed figure, a 124, and really seems to be coming to hand lately for Bill Mott. So she's one I may have to reassess because I think she has improved in these last couple starts in particular. The real disappointment had to be Bella Sophia. I didn't see much of an excuse for her at all. She sat off the long shot Emma Devil. The pace wasn't particularly fast at all. We have all the fractions coded in blue, and she just was not able to hold off either of the top two.
Yeah, it was kind of a strange race to watch. I mean, the horse that really did get the perfect trip was the winner, Kamari, who wants to kind of be sitting outside in the clear like she was, and she was able to produce the finish to get the job done, but not taking anything away from her performance, Craig. I mean, she really delivered in this race and put forth a nice 122 TimeformUS speed figure to win. I agree about Frank's Rocket. She ran better than I expected her to after that flat-footed break. And yeah, as for Bella Sophia, kind of strange to see them so readily concede the lead to Amma Devil, who does have a lot of early speed, but I mean, Bella Sophia would have been able to stick with her in the early going. It looked like they just quickly made the decision to rein her in and take back off the pace to try to get around that foe, and it just seemed like Bella Sophia reacted a little bit badly to those tactics. She dropped a little farther back off Amma Devil at the opening quarter than I think that they anticipated that she would, and it just seemed like she was never in the bridle after that. So I think that's always a risk you take when you try to take the speed away from a horse that's typically a front runner. Sometimes it just messes up their entire race.
Yeah, I would agree. She's a need to lead horse. When you look through her PPs, when she wins, she's either on the lead or she's sitting right next to another horse, not conceding ground like she did. So that those are some tactics I would definitely not revisit if I was riding her. It's better to just go at all costs, no matter how fast you have to go to get to the front.
Yeah, there also is the issue of the Rudy Rodriguez barn just being a little bit cold at this Saratoga meet. I think they're still looking for the first winner, and they've had quite a few starters so far, so something to be aware of if you're handicapping Saratoga right now. Let's move on to the feature race from Thursday, Craig. I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time on this one. The Birdstone going 1.75 miles, kind of a novelty race. You don't see them run this distance that much. And Lone Rock, who had been the dominant force in this marathon division for a while, feels like he's been usurped by Fearless after losing to him in the last couple starts.
Yeah, I was going to use the word supplanted. Fearless has taken over from him for sure. He's clearly the better horse at these distances. We do make a figure for stakes races, even at these longer distances. They're not really speed figures. It's more kind of a race rating. Fearless got a 117 for the effort. I don't know how much that really matters in these races. My one takeaway from this is I have no idea how Luis Saez could ride this horse that hard for that long without just falling off the horse after he crossed the finish line. That had to be the most exhausting ride I've seen in a long, long time. And just hats off to him because that was something else. And Fearless needed every bit of it. You've talked about it before. He's a horse that you just really have to get after him to get him to run. And it seemed like Luis Saez he got into him with a mile left in the race to keep him in contention and just kept going all the way to the wire.
Yeah, as I think Richard Migliore likes to say, he's a bicycle horse. If you're not pedaling, you're probably not going to get there on this one. And that does make Luis Saez a perfect fit for him because he's a rider that can be pretty aggressive with his handling and, kind of lift a horse up and make him cross the finish line. But Fearless is one of those horses that needs the encouragement. It's kind of a little, it's nerve-wracking to watch if you're a supporter of his because it just seems like he's not traveling well in his races. But he just seems to find more. He's got that stamina, which you do need to win going a demanding distance like 14 furlongs. Let's move on to some races from Sunday at Saratoga, and there are a few to talk about. They ran a couple of graded stakes, both grade 2 events. The Amsterdam for the 3-year-olds, going 6.5 furlongs, serves as the prep for the grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins later in the meet. And Craig, I think we probably got a couple starters for that race that will be considered contenders come Jerkins time, as Gunite just seems to love Saratoga. Last year's hopeful winner really stepped up his game to be successful here as a 2-year-old and seemed to do the same thing now that he's 3. Winning this race with a pretty nice speed figure.
Yeah, he wound up with a 117 speed figure, and that's knocked down a little bit because we have the early fractions coded in blue. The final time was a 121, and he's just a horse who's come back in really good form this year. He was beaten in his debut, a return this year by Conager, a horse we're going to talk about briefly later on, but has come back with 2 nice wins. His speed figure didn't look that great last time, but I think that was one we talked about on the forecast where I thought it was kind of iffy because it just seemed like it should have been a faster race. Horses have come back to run pretty well out of it, so I'm just not sure what to make of that one, but he ran fine on this day, so I would assume we're going to see him on the Jerkins, where the competition will get a little tougher, but he's certainly going to be a contender in there.
For sure. He's a horse that just seems to really love this Saratoga track, and he was game in victory here because it looked like Accretive had that momentum built up as he came to him at the 8th pole, and Gunite just dug in, kind of like he did in that prior race at Churchill, and just refused to let those closers get by him. So you like to see a horse really have that fight and will to win races, but I do also want to give credit to the runner-up, Craig Accretive, who took a big step forward off his debut performance. He had been impressive that day at Belmont, but nice to see him step up and do it against much tougher company. And I know he's pretty lightly raced, but he seems like another contender that Chad Brown has for that Jerkins to go along with Jack Christopher.
Oh, for sure. And that extra half furlong's not going to be a problem for him, you wouldn't think. It would be a benefit, if anything. He's out of Practical Joke, who, if memory serves, actually won the Jerkins en route to try in the Breeders' Cup that didn't go too well. But I think that was the highlight of his career. So big effort from him. Wasn't a whole lot in behind them, not a lot of running. So, yeah, those two are the ones I'd look forward to seeing.
Yeah, got to give a shout out to the 3rd place finisher, Runnin' Son of a Gun, who was claimed to have a maiden claimer for $40,000, I think, on New Year's Eve last year. And since then, they've picked up a placing in the Dwyer behind Charge It, and now this grade 2 placing in the Amsterdam. John Toscano and the connections have done a good job with him. I mean, the big no-show in the race, Craig, was Corniche, who just seems like a horse that it's no longer the one that he was as a 2-year-old, hasn't trained on. That was kind of apparent if you had watched his workouts coming into this race, and he's one that I doubt we ever see again.
Yeah, I saw a report in Daily Racing Form, and unfortunately, I can't remember who it was by. Dave
Yes.
Brenning, most likely, because it's New York, that he was injured in the race, and obviously that would be an excuse. But as you said, like it didn't look like he's a horse that was coming into the race very well. So I'm not sure what to make of him. And as for running Son of a Gun, I will say, if anything, it kind of flatters Charged, who we're going to see coming up in a few weeks in the Travers. He was 23 lengths in front and running Son of a Gun. So for him to come back and have this nice showing in the Amsterdam kind of enhances his resume a little bit.
No, that's a good point, and I feel like Charge is kind of the forgotten horse going on towards the Travers. I mean, it was a little while ago, a few weeks, that he won that Dwyer, but boy, did he look good that day. And we've got some, others that are going to be competitors in that Travers that I think have gotten a lot of attention recently: Cyberknife, Epicenter, Artorias, and some of the other runners from the Jim Dandy. But Charge is not a horse that you want to sleep on heading towards the Travers. Let's talk about the other graded stakes from Sunday at Saratoga. It was the Grade 2 Bowling Green. Craig, it doesn't feel like this is the cream of the crop of the older turf division right now. Some sort of B-list runners, but Rock Emperor, he's pretty good when he shows up. I think the thing with him is you can't really trust him to show up all the time.
No, for sure. You never know what to make of him. He run some good ones. I think he won one of the big stakes, the Hearst Classic, I believe, last year at Belmont. Immediately started throwing in clunkers. Hadn't really been showing up until this day when he shows up and runs another good one. He's going to get about a 121 speed, 122 speed figure for this effort. So a little bit below par for a grade two, I would say, for older males. And it just seems like this race came up a little bit weak this year.
One other race to talk about from Sunday at Saratoga, it is, of course, that 2-year-old filly maiden special weight event that went as race 6, won by the $500,000 purchase Prank, going out for Todd Pletcher. This filly, of course, by Into Mischief, the younger half-sister to Belmont Stakes winner Mo Donegal. And if you had kind of watched some of her workouts heading into the race, or heard some of the buzz, you knew that this one was very highly regarded, and boy, did she deliver on the racetrack.
Yeah, I would imagine she's worth a whole lot more than $500,000 about now. She got a 104 speed figure for the win, a 107 on final time, and the reason it's knocked down a bit is just because of the way she finished the race. She had a 98 pace figure after 4 furlongs, all the way to a 107 at the wire. So the sky's the limit for this one. Doesn't seem like there's any reason she can't go further. She's fast. And we had talked about it when we did some of these 2-year-old stakes at Saratoga that we would see better horses. And I would say she's the leader of the 2-year-old filly division right now, just based off this maiden win.
Yeah, sometimes people ask me, how do you watch the workouts in the morning? What do you look for? How do you know a horse is good or not? Go to XBTV and look up Prank's workouts coming into this race. It's a great example of a horse that just clearly has a lot more to give in the mornings than she's showing. Trying to run away from her company a little bit, but not getting rank. You could just, a horse that you could see when you watch the rider, that there's always more in the tank when she's traveling. And that even looked to be the case in the race here, as Rad Ortiz, I mean, he set her down briefly and he was showing her the whip through the stretch, but it feels like one that we're going to even see better from in the future, especially given that pedigree that she's got. So very exciting filly, and you'd imagine the early favorite for the spinaway. Craig, let's move on to Del Mar now, and we'll talk about the same mix of stakes races and 2-year-olds. We'll get to the juveniles a little bit later, but let's go through some of the graded stakes that they ran last week. The feature race on Saturday was the Grade 1 Bing Crosby, going 6 furlongs, and American Theorem, who had been an upset winner of the Triple Bend in his prior start at Santa Anita, proved that that was no fluke, as he won at a price once again here in pretty dominant fashion.
Yeah, he's a horse who seems to get overlooked quite a bit, but he stepped up again, and unbelievable to me that he was 7-1. I guess Shaz just took money, which seemed kind of crazy.
That was
to me.
crazy.
He was a horse. Yeah, he was a horse who I was at Lone Star Park the day he ran, and he just didn't really run at all. I don't know if people thought Bob Baffert was going to miraculously turn him into some great sprinter, but he wound up going off the favorite. Didn't run terribly. I don't want to make it like that, but I just thought the betting was goofy in here. And American Theorem, backed up that win, as you say. He got a 119 speed figure and closed into a slow pace, which I think is noteworthy. I think it probably held him back a little bit. He had a 121 final time number. So good effort from him, and look forward to seeing him. I assume at I forget what the 7 furlong race is that comes up later in the meet, but hopefully we see him in there.
Yeah, I think the Pat O'Brien later in the meet. So yeah, he seems like a horse that would be well suited to that. Craig, I did want to just ask you about how the track might have been playing at Del Mar on Saturday. I think I'm just browsing back to the chart right now. I think there was a color coding that I saw, like light blue. It did feel like a day when I watched these two stakes where outside moves were really preferred. We saw that from American Theorem, and also in the other stakes race we're going to talk about in just a bit. So maybe that compromised some of the horses racing towards the inside. That would have been Shaz, but still, he felt like a weird favorite in this race, a horse that hadn't really run back to his impressive debut. And watching Del Mar this week, it just feels like these bettors can't get enough of anything Bob Baffert puts on the track. They're just all getting pounded at the windows. So, I mean, something to be aware of. I haven't looked up his ROI at this meet, but I would imagine it's not quite holding up because the rate of success doesn't quite match the money that his horses are taking, as far as I can tell. But yeah, American Theorem, a good effort from him, and seems like he's really towards the top of this sprint division out west right now. The other graded stakes that they ran on that Saturday card, Craig, which again featured one of those kind of outside moves to win, was the San Diego, the prep for the Pacific Classic. And this one was won pretty impressively by Royal Ship, who somehow went off at 9-1 in this race, but got back to the good version of Royal Ship here with a pretty strong performance over a salty field.
Yeah, I mean, he had the races to back this up, and he did it here. I'm not sure how he got overlooked. And the frustrating thing for me, I put on Twitter, this horse was actually like 20-1 going in the gate. I know it's a little bit, it gets tiresome and people don't like hearing about it, but it really is frustrating for horse players. And I hope that at some point California would take a step like New York was and kind of shut these teams out with a couple minutes to post. But that said, I would have bet him at 9-1 because I thought he was just being totally overlooked in here. And he ran a really nice race. He got a 129 speed figure, something that we've seen from him before, edging out Country Grammar, who was coming off that really nice enriching desert campaign where he had a first and second and brought home a ton of money. That one ran a 127. And it's almost like you don't see many rivalries these days, but Royal Ship and Country Grammar are about as close to it as you get. I think they faced off against each other 4 or 5 times now, and hopefully we'll see a 6th time in the Pacific Classic.
Yeah, Country Grammar is another one of those horses that really needs to be ridden from a long way out. It kind of looked like he was going nowhere at about the half-mile pole, but John Velasquez kept asking him, and he clearly did get to the bottom of him as he found that stamina to stay on at the end of this race. And I think stamina is the key with both of these horses, Craig. They've proven that they can get the 1.25 mile distance, might even prefer it as they stretch out to go that far in the Pacific Classic next time. And I think in a lot of people's minds, it's just a foregone conclusion that Flightline is going to win the Pacific Classic, but boy, he's going to have to really show up in that race to beat the two horses that just prepped for it in this San Diego, because they are no slouches.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and this was only their 3rd time. I guess I was exaggerating a little, but every time Country Grammar's run since he changed from the Chad Brown barn to Bob Baffert, he's faced Royal Ship, and Royal Ship's now taken 2 out of 3, so I don't think it's a fluke. He's a real runner. And yes, if Flightline, he better be able to handle 1.25 miles, because these two certainly can, and will give him all he wants. Speaking of 1.25 miles, I guess the real disappointment in here had to be Mandaloon, who is now kind of thrown in 2 clunkers since he came back from the desert. Not sure what to make of him. I don't want to write him off just yet. It's not like he's not running at all. I mean, he ran 4th, but was beaten 6.5 lengths, I think, or 7 lengths in here. Was beaten 9 lengths by Olympiad. So I just am not sure what to make of him. Seems like maybe he just hasn't progressed at all from his 3-year-old season.
Yeah, I don't know if the speed figures say this. I liked this effort from him better than his Stephen Foster. The number might be lower. I have to look back at the chart. But yeah, he just wasn't really in a great spot early in this race. Got a little bit rank. Was probably too far back. I thought he was running on a little bit at the end. I don't think he's going to be the top handicap horse at the end of the year or anything close to that. But I mean, I did see some progression in this race. So maybe he's just a horse that has to race back into top form. But it's not like he was ever running the kind of speed figures that say that he could have beaten the performance that Royal Ship put forth. When that horse or even Country Grammar shows up, I mean, they're almost untouchable in this division. So we've got to see. I know that we've got some big speed figures, some horses that we're going to see in the Whitney next week at Saratoga, but seems like this is a pretty strong division right now, which piques my interest for what's going to happen in that Pacific Classic a little bit later in the meet. Let's move on to another stakes from this past weekend at Del Mar, the Grade 2 Eddie Reed going 9 furlongs on the turf, and quite an upset in this race, Craig, as the Michael McCarthy trained Masterpiece, coming off a bit of a layoff, got back to his best form and then some. This horse that had previously been with Chad Brown had kind of gone out of form for a while, hadn't really looked like a competitor in this kind of race, but boy did he show up in this day.
He did, and it's a race I don't have an official speed figure for, but I think it's going to fall around the 122 mark or so, or 123, something like that. And I thought it was a good, solid effort from him. He did get a bit of a good pace setup in here. He also kind of caused some trouble at the start. He may have aided his own cause by kind of slamming into the horses who finished right behind him, but it was the kind of race when I looked at it, he won easily enough, and usually those kind of things get overlooked at the start. So personally, I didn't have any problem with leaving that as is. I know some other people may have seen it differently, but that's just kind of the standard where you get a little bit of leeway at the start. And as easy as he won, I think it would have been a tough call to take him down in here. I think he was clearly best.
Yeah, I did not take a close look at that. I guess there was an inquiry at the end of this race, but he was a much the best winner. I don't know what happened at the start would have changed much in the outcome, but it just felt like he was one of the only horses that really showed up in this race. There were some no-shows behind. Beyond Brilliant, who was kind of a surprisingly decisive favorite in here, he just couldn't really kick on with the closers in the stretch of this race. And Masterpiece, when you're winning a turf race by over 3 lengths, it's a pretty dominant performance, and you could just feel like nobody else behind really took that step forward.
No, I only mentioned because it was a pretty lengthy inquiry, the kind where you started to think they were going to make a change. But I think the right call was made. And as I said, it was a good setup for the closers. There was clearly a quick pace. I would think all the fractions are going to be coded in red as I look at the worksheet. So maybe you want to give kind of the horses that were battling up front, Beyond Brilliant, Master of Fact, Foxhounds, give them a little bit of a pass in here. But on turf, that's always an iffy proposition because the closers are always going to have a little bit of an advantage, in my opinion.
Let's talk about some of these non-stakes events from last week at Del Mar. We had a couple of impressive allowance winners. On Thursday, we saw Slammed, a 4-year-old filly for Todd Fincher, come in and basically repeat some of the dominant performances that we saw from her in the Southwest, as she just ran a good allowance field off its feet to earn a pretty nice speed figure.
Yeah, this one kind of caught my eye when I was putting the rundown together. I was like, okay, 117, that's kind of borderline for an allowance race. Then I realized it was a filly who ran it. So that was a pretty impressive performance. It just said from a horse who had done a lot of her running on smaller circuits in New Mexico. But Todd Fincher, he is able to ship around and win races. We've seen it from him before, and this one was just a cakewalk. She blew the field away. She kind of had some pressure early. The fractions weren't very hot. They're all in blue on TimeformUS, but on the turn, she just absolutely annihilated the field and ran away from them. So I would assume this is one that had stakes races written in the future.
Yeah, they've got a real gem in this damn Hennessy Smash, who has produced this Philly Slam, as well as Smash Ticket, who we saw run some brilliant performances for them earlier this year and just recently at Saratoga. I think she's one that's going to try a race like the Test or the Prioress later in the meet. She throws some really fast runners, and this 4-year-old Philly Slammed is definitely one of them. Another horse that was an impressive allowance winner from this past week at Del Mar was Laurel River on Sunday, a horse that we had not seen since the Del Mar meet of 2021, but coming off the 10-month layoff, didn't look any worse for the time away as he was a dominant winner for Bob Baffert.
Yeah, this was a big effort from him. Obviously, he must have some issues because he was gone for quite a while, but he came back well. I would imagine he's going to get about a 122 Timeform US speed figure looking over the worksheet. So I will be interested to see where he shows up next because he's a horse who's often run speed figures that are pretty stakes relevant if he were to show up in them. It's just a matter of if he can stay on the track.
Yeah, he's a horse that's now 2 for 2 since they stretched him out around 2 turns, going the 1 mile distance. And yeah, you'd imagine there would be stakes in the immediate future for this horse if he can put together any kind of campaign this year. He's a son of Into Mischief who's very well bred, raced and bred by Judd Montt. So you'd imagine they want to get some black type for this horse. But he clearly has ability and has handled the stretch out. We'll just see if he's able to transfer that form to some tougher races in the future. Let's talk about a couple more races from Sunday, Craig, that got some attention on social media for the speed figures assigned to them and also the visual of the performances. The one that got the higher speed figure among two-year-old maiden races was the first race of the day, I believe, won by Jackstown, one of 2 Bob Baffert trainees. And this one did it the way that you often see 2-year-olds win their debuts, just in gate-to-wire fashion, showing speed.
Yeah, it was a good effort. The pace wasn't very quick. He's going to get about a 99 speed figure, knocked down a few points from the low triple digits. But this was more like what you expect to see from a Bob Baffert horse, though we saw it from the other Bob Baffert because there was another one, Massimo, who was bet down to 4 to 5 in here and kind of chased his stablemate around the track. But Jackstown was just clearly the better of the 2 in here.
And the one that I think caught a lot of people's attention and has them, kind of going gaga over the performance was Justique, who ran later. This was a 2-year-old filly going the same 5.5 furlong distance, but accomplished her victory in a very different fashion than Jackstown, as she was off slowly, decidedly last in the early going in a 10-horse field, which is not where you want to be as a first-time starter, but she started to make some progress around the turn and just put in the kind of run that you rarely see from a 2-year-old passing the entire field to win by 2.5 lengths pretty comfortably in the end.
Yeah, it was impressive effort. She's going to wind up with about an 89 speed figure, so substantially lower than Jackstown, who we talked about, and even Prank at Saratoga. This is one I'm going to need to see more. Maybe she wants to go further. It's always hard to say with these horses that come from behind in the sprints earlier in their career if they're just sprinters who like to come from off the pace or not. But I don't want to base her too much on that 89 speed figure because I did like what I saw on the turn. As you said, it was noticeable. It's not like she clunked up and ran by some tired horses at the end. She actually was catching everyone on the turn, so it was pretty eye-catching. She was able to do it in traffic, so I do think there's some talent there. I'm not going to go crazy like some people were, but I'm also not going to write her off because of that seemingly lowest speed figure.
Yeah, I mean, some of the conversations I've seen around this race and the debates about speed figures have gotten a little ridiculous. I mean, it's like turning into this East Coast, West Coast bias if you think Prank or Justique is the real deal, or, if you believe the speed figure or don't believe the speed figure. I mean, you can appreciate both performances. I mean, obviously, Prank did it in the uncomplicated way, just running a fast time, going to the front end. But, I mean, you have to respect that Justique did something that you don't often see from a 2-year-old. I mean, passing all the horses the way she did, overcoming disadvantageous slow start. Sure, the pace was fast and she was closing into it, but it's not like anybody else made up that kind of ground in the race. She was the only one moving from the back of the pack. It was not a race that fell apart by any means, and she does feel like one that's going to appreciate some more ground. She is the younger half-sister to Motown, who won the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby. That was on the turf, but he was a horse that could also handle the dirt. So a lot to like about Justique, and she is one of the few progeny of Justify that we've seen, and the little of the Justify babies that have been that we've taken in, Craig, have been pretty impressive. I think I don't know how many he had running on Sunday, but coming into that day, I think of the 9 debut runners he had, 7 had been in the Exacta with 3 or 4 winners. So Justify is turning out to be a budding good sire of 2-year-olds. We'll see if it's more than that. But Justique, definitely one of the best that we've seen in his first crop.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is the trainer, John Sheriff, just doesn't send out first-time starters to win very often. Now, there was a time in his career where that was his MO. I can remember him being 40% with first-time starters, so he knows how to do it. It's just that he's changed, and he rarely does it anymore. So I would be very surprised if this horse had been fully cranked up first time out.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the reason that the hype machine's going into overdrive on this horse, because it's hard to avoid those Zenyatta comparisons. A horse that would make that last to first move, won her debut kind of as a bit of a surprise for John Sheriff's. Clearly, Justique has a long way to go to be, mentioned in the same breath as Zenyatta, but I understand why some people are kind of going crazy with making that comparison. You don't see John Sheriff's unveil a precocious 2-year-old that often. Move on to some other venues before we wrap up this show, Craig, because there was some nice racing taking place around the country at other places than Saratoga and Del Mar. Certainly the case at Laurel on Saturday, as we saw a couple of nice speed figures. One in the Star de Nascra for the 3-year-olds, won by A Lot of Hope. I guess I shouldn't mention multiple horses, as it was just one horse basically running the speed figure, the 121. He was at a different zip code than the rest at the end.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure where that race came from, but he just totally ran off the screen and dusted these horses. He hadn't been in the greatest form and just kind of came out of nowhere, but he won by a football field and is going to get a 121, or did get a 121 speed figure for the effort. So it will be interesting to see if he can back that one up, because this one was impressive.
Yeah, interesting to watch the rider. I mean, I guess almost not aware of how far ahead he was, because he was really riding this horse all the way to the finish to kind of achieve that time, not really easing him up at all at the end. So this is not one of those that you could make the case could have run faster, even though he won by a huge margin. But yeah, I don't know what to make of it. Like you said, he had nothing in his prior form that suggested that this kind of improvement would be forthcoming. There were some others behind that I guess didn't show up, like the last place finisher Super Love, that might have exaggerated the margin of victory a little bit, but it's hard to argue with the speed figure, because this horse really ran and won by, as you said, a football field. Let's move on to the other notable speed figure from Saturday at Laurel. That was in the deputed testimony for older horses going 2 turns. And riding with Biden, Craig, he's a horse that had always been good, but it seems like over his last few starts, he's just slowly but surely been creeping up in the speed figure department, been running progressively faster, and this was the best he's produced yet.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like him being gelded has had something to do with that. He was always a pretty solid horse, but he seems to have taken another turn. He came back with a nice win at Delaware. Not much of a speed figure, but it was a slow pace that day. And then he showed up in a race we talked about, but we didn't really mention him, with when Tax made his return and won. He ran a 118 speed figure that day riding with Biden, and he backed it up in here with a 120 on this day, winning easily by 6 lengths. So he seems to be one that's moving in the right direction. He's still just a 4-year-old, and it seems like gelding did the trick. So he's one that could make a dent in some of these bigger stakes coming up in Maryland.
Yeah, I love the visual of this performance. He's one of those horses that when he's not running at full speed, he kind of, runs with his head bowed. You could see that nearly going. He just looked so relaxed and well within himself for the first half mile of the race. And once he set his rider, Frecky Pennington, set him down, you could see he kind of extended his head a little more and finished off this race very nicely to earn that 120 Timeform US speed figure. Not a horse that I think was going to be a factor in the Breeders' Cup Classic, but just a horse that's really improved on the Maryland circuit, and as you said, is going to be pretty dangerous in those races moving forward. Let's talk about a couple of races from Monmouth. The feature race there over the weekend was the Grade 3 Monmouth Oaks for the 3-year-old fillies, going a mile and a 16th. Kind of a rematch of some also-rans from the Mother Goose, as Shahama got the better of Juju's Map. Feels like the latter one just hasn't really gone on since looking okay in her return at Churchill, but Shahama seems like she's doing pretty well in Todd Pletcher's barn as she gets her first graded stakes victory in the U.S.
Yeah, this was a race that kind of flew under the radar for me. I totally missed it on Saturday, and that's what can happen with Saratoga and Del Mar running. I didn't even realize they were running a graded stakes, but Shahama certainly is one that's going in the right direction, the opposite of Juju's Map, who looked good in their return, but her speed figure hadn't really progressed from her 2-year-old season, and it still hasn't, because she didn't really show up with her best form, and Shahama did. Good effort from her. For the effort, she gets a 112 speed figure. So a pretty far cry from what we're going to see in the big stakes races at Saratoga, or even, Del Mar doesn't really run 3-year-old races, but she's not in the same class as those, but a nice victory nonetheless.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird ride on Juju's Map. The pace was very slow in the early going. It almost seemed like it was too slow for a front runner. She kind of took away any advantage that she would have had over Shahama by letting that one be right on her flank the entire way. And obviously, Shahama's a better finisher as a runner that typically comes from off the pace. So yeah, I just didn't think those were winning tactics. But also, she's a horse that just hasn't really gone on, as you said. She never has really fulfilled that promise that she showed as a 2-year-old. Other stakes from Monmouth this past week on Saturday was the Tyro, going 5 furlongs on the turf for the 2-year-olds. And Greg, another sire that has really come out firing in his freshman crop is Sharp Azteca, and looks like he can get progeny that run on dirt or turf, as his runner Sharp as Attack is now 2 for 2 in his career for Doug O'Neill. Won his maiden on California, shipped east for this race, and took a big step forward.
Yeah, this one's kind of been a surprise. He was one we weren't able to make a speed figure when he ran at Santa Anita on the turf. I think it was the only turf sprint of the day, and none of the other horses had run yet. So even looking back, it's not one I'd be comfortable making a speed figure, because most of the run backs have come on the dirt. Sharp as Attack is one who did not come out on the dirt. He stayed on the turf, and rightfully so. He just demolished this field by 7 lengths, which is really tough to do in a 5 furlong race. Did it with a 107 speed figure, so one that's really talented.
Yeah, you had to like what you saw from this one. He just ran them off their feet right from the start. Attained an early advantage and just kept opening up on this field. So definitely one to look forward to in these sprint races. Another progeny of Sharp Azteca that can run pretty fast on the dirt we saw at Prairie Meadows over the weekend, a horse that I know that you've had some interest in, Craig. That's Tyler's Tribe, who won the Iowa Stallion Futurity, and don't think any of the Iowa breds are going to be getting close to this horse anytime soon, as he has won his 3 races by, I think, a combined 37 lengths.
Yeah, that sounds right. It's right around there, and I mean, I'm not sure what to make of this horse. He's, as you said, by Sharp Azteca, who's having a really good season with his crop so far, and this one ran a 105 speed figure. He's doing things just as easy as you like, and I would hope at some point they get a little ambitious and maybe move around and see what this horse can do against better horses for bigger money, because he is obviously really talented. I believe he was gelded already, so there's not a whole lot to lose on that front. You may as well go and try to win your money on the track. And he's got the speed to be dangerous wherever he shows up.
Yeah, I'd love to see them try a tougher spot with this horse. You could see when you watch him run, he's kind of this early developing, highly muscled horse that probably is just a step ahead of his competition from a development standpoint right now. So why not take advantage of it this summer and try some tougher spots, whether you ship to Del Mar or Saratoga or something like that. There are plenty of nice purses out there for the 2-year-olds. He probably would have to come off Lasix to run in some of those races. I know that's a concern for connections that run in the Midwest where you can run on Lasix, but this horse deserves a shot because he's looked pretty impressive, albeit not beating much, but he's running some nice speed figures out there. One more race that we'll briefly mention on this podcast actually just happened yesterday as we're recording this on a Tuesday. That was at Colonial Downs where Conager won the Housebuster Handicap, and just a funny horse, Craig, that's kind of come out of nowhere to assert himself as one of the top sprinters in the country among the 3-year-olds right now. He's been running consistently high speed figures, though his connections are kind of been taking the path of least resistance up until now. That could change at his next start.
Yeah, I've heard he may run in the Jerkins. We shall see. I did a real quick perusal of the worksheet to see what kind of speed figure he's got. I would imagine it's going to be just a little bit below 120, somewhere in the 118, 119 range. Speed figures are not easy to make on the dirt at Colonial because they rarely run on the dirt there, and there's just not a lot to go on. So he's a horse who had shown plenty of speed. He had that explosive win in an allowance race. Didn't fare as well when he tried to stretch out in the Iowa Derby, though I thought he ran fine that day. He just didn't quite handle the distance while having to be pressed through a fast pace, couldn't quite hold on. So I think sprints are the right idea for him, and he deserves a shot against the bigger boys.
Yeah, he's a horse that they haven't been shy about running over the past few months. I don't think that race he ran in the Indiana Derby was that long ago, or was it I think it was the Iowa Derby. I'm getting all of these confused. Yes, yeah, I mean, sprinting is definitely his game. We'll see if he's able to compete against some of the top sprinters out there in the Allen Jerkins, because there's no shortage of runners running big speed figures coming into that race. I know the connections have also expressed some apprehension about taking him off Lasix. Some of the decisions that they've made about where to run him recently have been to find races where he can run on Lasix. I don't know if he has a history of bleeding or if they're just afraid of the possibility of that, but it's something to consider with this horse. But he does deserve a shot in that race. He's running the kinds of speed figures that say he might be among the best 3-year-old sprinters out there. So they've got to try to get some tougher competition.
Yeah, and I mean, it was just Colonial Downs, but he beat a couple pretty good horses, particularly Old Homestead, who had won the Lafayette at Keeneland. Didn't run as well when he went to Pimlico in the Chick Lang, but have rebounded to win a smaller listed stake at Laurel. So he beat a pretty fast 3-year-old.
That's all the racing to recap from this past week. There was quite a bit of it. We tried to cover as much ground as possible in the allotted time that we have. But Craig, still plenty of nice racing coming up later this weekend. Of course, we have the Whitney coming up on Saturday. We'll see how that race is drawn. It's going to have a nice field, probably not a big field, but we do have some of the best older horses in the country pointing towards it. So definitely something to look forward to. And we'll see how the card comes up. Maybe it'll be one that we discuss on the forecast later in the week.
Yeah, I haven't really paid much attention to who the probables are, but it's a Whitney, so we know we're going to get at least some nice horses in a good matchup. I doubt it's one where we'll get a super heavy favorite, because there's a few good horses out there who could show up in the spot. May not be the biggest field, but we'll see, and I'm sure the card will be good, as most of the Saratoga ones are.
Yes, I believe that the field currently stands at Life is Good, Olympiad, and then Todd Pletcher has Happy Saver as well. I think American Revolution is running, and I think even Hot Rod Charlie has been confirmed for that race. So even if you just have those 5 or 6, that's a pretty strong field and horses that you're looking forward to see match up on the racetrack.
Yeah, you could have stopped after the first 2, and I'd have been happy with that one.
Yeah, so something to look forward to this weekend, and Craig and I'll take a look at that sequence to see if it's worth handicapping on the forecast later in the week. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.